Oh, he's on.
Okay.
Hey, Brandy. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? He left. I think he's having audio issues. You need a pen?
No, I got a red pen to do answers with.
There we go. Can you hear us now? He's having audio issues.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, this pop says cannot connect to audio. Can you still hear us?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. How are you?
All right, there we go.
So I'm sending
Perfect.
down license, Aline Moore, she's on town council. And it's just the two of us today.
Hello, Chief.
Hi, Elaine. Elaine, is that right?
Eileen.
Eileen, hi, how are you?
Great, thanks. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
So we just want to go over the, so it's just the two of us, we're gonna make this brief, I hope. We want to go over the county's new EOP plan, regional EOP plan. She had a bunch of questions that Chris sent us down here, and we just want to bring it to you guys' attention at the county level.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, that's all right. Go ahead.
Well, I know you had a meeting with the staff, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, I was left off the attendance list, and I was a little surprised since I was the one who asked for the meeting in the first place. So I apologize. I did want to go through my list of questions. Some of them are fairly generic, and just get some answers to that. You may have already answered these questions before with the staff, and I apologize for the redundancy if that's the case. But since I am the liaison to this Emergency Preparedness Committee, I would like to make sure that I get a good understanding of how this plan was done, what's in it, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, so and I thank you for making the time. I understand you're a very busy man. If you don't mind, I'll just launch into them.
Sure, that'd be fine.
Okay, thank you. So my first kind of generic question is, we are, and this comes up all the time, so please, I don't want to put you on the defensive. I'm just asking the questions. The question comes up all the time is that Scottsville is part of the county, but when county things go on, we don't seem to be included. And so I'd like to know who was included or engaged in developing this plan, since it's a county-wide plan. Let's see, on one of the early pages, executive summary, it says it's contingent upon a collaborative approach between partner agencies, organization, et cetera. So I just was curious as to who was engaged from the Scottsville side.
Yeah, and it's a fair question and a good question. And I'll say that it's a long answer. And so I'll start with where we ended up, how we ended up where we are now, and then I'll kind of explain where I hope to be for the next revision. You may know that we used to have a regional emergency management office. And out of the Emergency Communications Center, the city, county, and university were all represented by the emergency manager for the region. And then a number of years ago, for a host of reasons, we realized that we needed to invest more in emergency management at the local level. The city, county, university all needed emergency management staff, needed to be doing work in the emergency management arena above and beyond what we were capable of doing at the regional level. Since then, there is still a position at the ECC, but it has been vacant, predominantly vacant since then. There was a little bit of time where there was some overlap with Maribel Street, who was in a position for the region, but that position has been kind of redefined, if you will. It's now called an emergency management liaison. We'll have a lot of the same duties, but it hasn't been filled yet. So that regional coordination will continue into the future. When we kind of decentralized, if you will, there was a single regional emergency operations plan, or EOP, that was adopted by the city, county, and university. Once we completed that kind of decentralization, each jurisdiction needed to have their own emergency operations plan. And we were actually late. I don't remember. I think we were 6 months or more beyond the deadline for having an adopted emergency operations plan with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. So what we did was we took the existing regional plan, and frankly, I can't really speak directly to how that plan may have been developed years ago, but it would have been, probably about 8 years ago or more. We took that existing plan and simply pulled out wherever it said region and plugged in Albemarle, made very few changes to it, so that we could get a plan that was on file with the state and meet that requirement. And then the intent from that. So that's kind of how we got to where we are now. The intent going forward, though, is to and frankly, I don't have a plan for this yet, but the intent going forward is to do a more engaging process involving not only this town of Scottsville, but other stakeholders and folks that are involved in our EOP and impacted by our EOP in the next revision process. And I, in my mind anyway, and this is just John O'Prandy speaking right now, that process may look much more similar to the way we're engaging in a community-wide process to create our comprehensive plan, the AC 44 effort, if you're familiar with that. That may be a little bit more robust than we maybe need for our emergency plan, but it will be more inclusive of those folks that I mentioned when we do the next revision.
Okay, so you're saying, well, this needed to be quick and dirty because of some time constraints and personnel shifting and organizational problems. Next time you envision more engagement. Is that a good comment?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I probably could have just said that.
The only thing I will point out, sir, and again, I know it's not all on you, but you will have a seat at the table when all of this gets shifted around for the next time. And I'm a resident. I'm a local politician, an elected official. I pay Albemarle County taxes, and I expect that our needs should be covered through our tax dollars, right? So my viewpoint and what I've often been told is, you know what, you're in the rural area, you just have to accept that. And I said, accept that? No way. I pay taxes just as much as everybody else in the county, and I want the same level of consideration, of performance. I don't care what services they are, whether it's first responders or whether it's emergency preparedness. So I would like, when you sit at that table, to please make sure that that viewpoint gets across to whoever else is sitting around the table. I would ask that of you.
Because I know that we have assisted living down here, we're mainly concerned of rural area services down here. And we just feel like we should be a part of, have a common like operations plan, so we know how to approach residents in case there's an emergency. I know that there's a 72-hour period that I've learned. And that 72-hour period, we should be more
Yeah,
clear.
the ops plan says that we need to be prepared for 72 hours on our own. However, there is also a need to have coordination between the county and the town, right?
Mhm.
So we just need to make sure that those touch points and those intersections are all fully accounted for in the next plan. So I appreciate your viewpoint that hopefully we'll have a seat at the table and we'll be engaged going forward. But if we're not, I would really like you to make that viewpoint known, that we're still residents of the county, whether a separate township or not.
Yeah, and I know there are. I mean, I've been involved for quite a while, so I know there are some politics involved. And I try to do my best to remain somewhat agnostic to that and focus on exactly what you just described. There's a level of risk in the town of Scottsville. That is a part of Albemarle County, and we have a responsibility to use risk to inform our decision making and our response. And on a number of ways, that town area and the area around the town and the river represent is probably the most risky. Risky is not the right way to say it. Has the most risk level associated with it than any other rural area in the county, similar to an urban area, frankly, in terms of a risk profile. And so I think that's why you do see some investment going on down there in terms of an ambulance, in terms of tanker and engine company, that kind of stuff. I think that the flood plan and the evacuation planning and stuff should all be a part of something that we support. So in that regard, I agree, and I will represent that. But I think you also, somebody from the town will certainly be there at the table, with that in mind, with that risk profile in mind. Certainly somebody from the town will be at the table.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, sir. Okay, do you have your ops plan? It might be easier because I'm going page by page here, Chief.
I can certainly pull it up. Yes.
Yeah, why don't you pull it up?
And one thing I should have probably led with, I don't know if Jack lets you know, but I have till 3:30. So it may be that I may need to get some of these answers back to you at a later time or something, but I'm happy to spend that time.
Well, let's see. I've got
She's picking up on every single page.
a bunch of questions that go through I don't think I went through every, yes, yeah. I think I stopped there, but I do have quite a few questions. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's see what we can cover.
Okay.
I can condense them. Okay, on page 2, there are a list at the top of things that the county will provide. It starts on page 1. And it says like ensure security of the county and or of the region, save lives, protect health, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole bunch of bullet points here. Do you follow where I am?
It's like, what do you give them like the,
I know.
Is it section 1.1
1.1?
purpose?
Yes, sir. Section 1.1. Is this what we can expect from the county as well? Analyze information to support decision-making and action plan. Manage county resources effectively in emergency response. Protect and restore critical infrastructure and key resources. Is this what Scottsville can expect from the county, since it says county-wide?
Yes, within the confines of the legal structure of the county and the town. There are, for example, there are some time ago, we had some damage to public property in the town, and the town has to submit separately to the state for reimbursement or possible reimbursement of those public facilities that could be damaged, and they meet a different threshold for that. And so there are some differences, but I think yes, to answer your question, yes, we would. This is what we provide from the Emergency Operations Center that we would set up in the midst of a, if it was just a flood that was down in Scottsville that didn't affect any of the other county, we would set up an Emergency Operations Center. It may be up here that we set that up. It could be down there that we set it up. And we would run that EOC to support whatever we needed to deal with the emergency.
Right. So, and you bring up a good question, and I think I have it later on here about priority. Let's say we have more of a regional wide. Let's say we have an ice storm that comes through and knocks out power to the county, right? My concern in the rural area is that we have a number of elderly residents, a number of disabled residents that are far from hospitals, transportation, and things like that. It's my feeling from reading this document that the priority is going to go to UVA, to Charlottesville, to Crozet from a county perspective, because those are the areas of the greatest population density. I sort of want to understand is how does the rural area fit into the countywide plan in terms of responsiveness? If we have a countywide emergency, is there, from your perspective, we go to this area first, this area second, this area third, and Scottsville's 10th? Or we have enough staff that we're going to cover all the areas? What does that picture look like?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Hard to answer. Depends on the situation, and it's dynamic, right? If early on in the incident, our resources are overwhelmed, then absolutely we'll go through a process of trying to figure out, well, let's say there are 6 different significant incidents that are going on that have an incident commander trying to resolve the situation, and they all 6 need resources. The resources from that we have remaining will be determined based on the risks associated of each of those incidents. How many people need to be relocated, or how many people are in danger, or need to be, how much impact do we have in terms of search and rescue? And so that will occur outside of whether or not that's in a development area or in the rural area. That will just become straight up a comparison of the needs of each of those incident commanders for the event that they have going on. So a facility in Scottsville that is a nursing care facility or where folks are living that needs a number of resources that's a higher priority than an event that's happening in the urban area. That rural area resource, Scottsville would get those resources. Now, the reality, and we don't have this happen that often, but we had it happen March 20th due to brush fires. The reality is that we have a very finite number of resources, and when we max those resources out, we are a long way from significant help. It's an hour drive from major metropolitan areas that might be able to send us, more help. But these types of incidents that might impact it, like a hurricane or major flooding or something like that, are incidents that are handled over days and then weeks, as you know. And so we would use that process even in requesting mutual aid, and prioritizing those resources throughout the county.
Well, I'm assuming that if your resources are overwhelmed, you make an appeal to the state for resources. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, we have statewide. We participate in statewide mutual aid, and so that request goes up through the Department of Emergency Management, goes out to all the localities within the state, and then outside of that, we also have a state-to-state compact that if necessary, we can request resources from outside of the state.
Now, inside the operations plan, it mentions the 72 hours. So is it safe to assume that the SLA for your organization is post 72 hours, we're guaranteed that you will provide resources, or is that not a safe assumption?
Yeah, I would, that's a good question too. I would not call it, um, I would not call it a guarantee. I think it all depends on, well, first of all, let me back up. The 72 hours is ideal, and we really encourage people to be self-sufficient for 72 hours. But the reality of the situation is first of all, uh, mostly people who can afford and who find the time, and it's easy to prepare for 72 hours. Those people tend to be the folks that are ready. It's much harder for somebody who is living a paycheck to paycheck or is on a fixed income to have 72 hours worth of meals ready to eat and whatever else, stored away in their basement.
Well,
And
if the electricity is out and we have people on life alert, if we have people who need medical attention, they're much harder to get to. And how does
yeah,
that factor into your risk profile, right? They're a lot closer to the hospitals, in the Charlottesville, Crozet area than they are out here in Southern Albemarle.
well, yeah, or Northern Albemarle or Northwestern Albemarle or Southwestern Albemarle. I
Yeah,
mean,
true.
it's a
So
huge area.
how do you prioritize that? I'd like to understand that. Do you have it broken up into regions?
No,
You don't.
no, it's we don't have anything predetermined. It all depends on the situation at hand. And so we will do a risk assessment based on the situation we're presented with. And then based on the incident itself, that helps us describe the risk that we've got going on.
It would seem that it would make more sense to have things broken up into regions so that you could do that risk assessment, right? I mean, it's something to think about. It sounds a lot, it feels a lot like, to me, well, we're just gonna wait till something happens and then we're gonna assess the situation. Is that normally how it's done?
Well, I mean, I don't think I would agree that that's what we're doing. We do a hazard and risk analysis, vulnerability analysis as part of the EOP, and it describes very broad impacts: flooding, severe weather, fire. And so we know that those things could happen, and then we prepare our resources accordingly. But in terms of allocating the resources to any section or area of the county, we don't predetermine that the northwest part of the county is going to get these resources. The resources are allocated based on the needs in the moment.
Well, here's a good example, Chief. So I'm looking at section 2.9 on page 9. There is what you described. You've listed sort of the major threats, right? And the second one down is flooding, right?
Yes.
So if we were to look at regionally, right? Let's say the county is broken up into 6 regions. Since you brought up a magic number of 6, I'm just going to use that. It would seem from a risk profile that being on the James would put us at a higher risk profile than some of the other places in the county, correct?
Yeah, I think you could make that, and I think that's evident in the mitigation efforts that have gone on down there with the levee system, with the planning that's.
I'm not arguing that. I'm just arguing from a response time and a prioritization of resources. If you had that plan detailed by region, you could say, well, under scenario or threat number 2 of flooding, the priority would be to, let's say Scottsville is a region 3. The priority may be in region 3 over the others because the severity of risk, right? You have probability and severity, how you measure a risk profile. The probability and the severity would be the highest in region 3, right?
Not necessarily, no. In fact, just a few years ago, we had in Ivy a significant storm with significant impact, took out a dam in a neighborhood, lost several lives in some flooding.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and so the reality is that we need to be prepared across the county, but again, our resources are deployed based on the risks at hand in that moment.
Okay,
Um,
got it. Um, let's see, I'm trying to see the highlights. So. Yeah, so in terms of priority, and I said earlier that I assumed that UVA, Charlottesville, Pros A areas that more densely population, that gets more attention because like in section 2 dot, that's weird. 8, 9, 7. In section 2.4, I guess. My pages are all messed up. Here we go. In section 2.4. That's weird. It talks about specifically about Charlottesville, specifically about taxpayers in the UVA area. And that's why I asked the questions about the rural area, because there's no necessarily specific mention of the rural areas per se. So in the next version of the ops, I think it might be helpful to have the rural areas covered as sort of a separate section and called out specifically of some of the specific needs. The transportation needs will be greater, right, in the rural area. Getting people evacuated would perhaps be more difficult, and where they will evacuate to. It took us a long time to figure out where the evacuation center was for like the residents of the assisted living facility here in town, where they would go per se, like where would they be taken if they needed to be taken. So I don't want to get to where we have an event and we don't have those questions answered. So again, with you having a seat at the table, it would be good if you could call out, hey, let's not forget the rural areas and build them into the next version of the ops plan. Is that reasonable?
yes, absolutely.
Okay. Let's see. So you say the 72 hours.
Is that for the damage assessment? The 72-hour period, chief?
No, the 72 hours is a you know, a recommendation, a hope, a best case scenario that that people that we use, that FEMA uses and we use as well, to try to kind of inspire people to be ready for what frankly could be the inevitable, that something significant hits the area, our resources are overwhelmed, and they have to do the best they can for the first 72 hours, because it may be that long before we can get help, you know, regionally or from beyond, if need be, if it's that significant of an event, because our own resources are going to be overwhelmed. So it's you know, in my mind, Amy, this is just, again, this is just John O'Prandy talking. It's somewhat aspirational, because the reality is there's going to be a lot of people who are not ready for the next 12 hours, let alone the next 72, and they're going to be in dire straits, and you know, we're going to have to do the best we can to support them. You know, and that's where, you know, you'll see neighbors helping neighbors making a big difference. You know, the different communities reaching out and helping each other in those times, the community emergency response teams, you know, to the extent that we have, those all are things that really help until we can get the big resources there from wherever they might be coming from when we are overwhelmed, if that makes sense.
Well, it does make sense, but you know, there's a certain level of discomfort. I mean, that 72 hours is called out constantly. I think it should be spelled out more clearly at a minimum of 72 hours, and that it could be more given the incident, to your exact point, right? Because I don't recall that was called out specifically. So I was assuming that 72 hours was kind of like the maximum we would have to wait for county resources, not necessarily a good ballpark estimate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it is not a contract. The 72 hours is not any sort of contractual, agreement with anyone. It is more general than that.
So
And
if the incident is widespread, then we're kind of on our own to,
well,
from what
yeah,
I,
could be. I mean, ideally we're able to stretch the resources that we have thin. The volunteers are able to, oftentimes they can really staff up during those times of need. The community steps up, and we're able to get help to people, before that time period. Frankly, I don't think we've ever seen the type of event. Maybe way back in the early 70s with Camille. Those types of things have there are stories there where those people probably were, this is 72 hours plus, right? But since then, and we're often ahead of time. We're opening shelters or warming centers or different things ahead of time, trying to mitigate for possible impact and those kind of things. But you're absolutely right to be concerned about it, to be asking questions about it, and to be preparing for that as a real possibility. Because if the right set of circumstances happen, then we will absolutely be overwhelmed and have a significant event similar to that again.
well, my concern as an elected official, if one of the things that when I was first took this seat was, East Palestine, right? And what happened there, right? That was a complete, disaster from the public viewpoint. And I'm sure everybody did the best that they could, but it was not well organized, well coordinated. There was just a lawsuit that's been settled, I guess, on the behalf of the railroad or whatnot. But, and as an elected official, people are looking to us for answers and for, okay, what happens if that happens in our community? What if we flood? What if we have a train derailment that happens to have hazmat materials? What if we have an infrastructure, failure that goes on for a week? What if we have severe weather, right? And I feel that my responsibility as an elected official, I feel very responsible to be able to answer those questions. And I'm not really getting a whole lot of concrete things to be able to rely on. And that makes me very uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
what triggers the jump from a local incident to a county incident? We have these ESF levels. We go from what? Is it level 1 to level, I forget if it's level.
I think it's back here.
Level 1 to level 3 or level 3 to level 1.
I think it's 3.
Yeah, those are EOC activations, and it speaks to the complexity of the incident. A level 1 activation is the most significant. It's a full activation of the Emergency Operations Center, and we'll have a lot of people in the room because we've had significant impact. Whereas a level 3 is your typical snowstorm where there's a lot going on, a lot of coordination needs to happen. We may even, in the past, we've had the National Guard involved, going in ahead of ambulances, trying to make sure we can get to people, in areas that are not plowed. But it's more of a public safety. It's not an impact that goes beyond that. We can handle it with a smaller team. And so that's what those levels are.
Well, and I had assumed, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, that level 3 was sort of like mostly we would handle it locally, right? That it wouldn't necessarily bump up to the county. It may require some help. But when you get to level 2 and certainly level 1, that's where the county and possibly the state resources are deployed. Is that a correct view?
Well, if you're looking at it from the local level, as in the town may handle it, um, that level three is a local, as in the county fire rescue system. Maybe the town police department would be involved, um, but it would be, if an EOC is activated, it's a county EOC, and it's gone beyond the complexity that can just be handled with a few units on the side of the road. It is a countywide, well, I shouldn't say countywide event. It's an event that's requiring a larger number of resources to coordinate. It could just be something that's happening in Scottsville.
I,
Um,
I see. Okay, so
but that's just about the EOC levels. There are also, it's similar to FEMA typing of incident complexity, but it's not the exact same thing. FEMA has a complexity typing that goes from 5 to 1. 5 being the least complicated, which is basically a car accident on a highway with an engine, an ambulance, and a police officer, to a type 4, which is a little bit larger event handled by the county, type 3 event, which is the county and maybe some mutual aid in neighboring counties, to a type 2, which gets to the state level, and then a type 1, which is a significantly complicated event with national implications.
okay, so I have my things put up. So there would be a level 2, let's say, equivalent that would require little to no county involvement. The level 3 is where the county gets involved, correct? Is that what you're telling me? By and large, right? By and large.
When you say the county gets involved, you mean the county would get involved with the town?
Yeah, or just involved with the incident in general, right?
I would, yeah, the county would be involved in any incident that happens, because the county provides fire and EMS service down there.
So
So
even when there's a local breakdown on the road or something like that, like what you just described?
a car accident, yes.
Okay, all right, got it. Sir, I want to respect your time. It's 25 up. I don't want to make you late. So I have a whole bunch more questions, but
Okay.
I'll just hang on to them.
Okay. Yeah, we can figure out where to go from here. But yeah, I've got to run. But I appreciate your questions, and I hope they were helpful. I hope the answers were helpful. There's a lot of work that we need to do, which is why we even established the office. But I do appreciate your involvement and your questions.
Yeah, and thank you. I appreciate your time. It is not my intent to put you on the spot. I know you're kind of in the hot seat for all of this, but I am, as an elected official, as I said, I do find some things where I'd love to be able to give firm answers, and, they're just not. So hopefully, as we engage together, town and county moving forward, hopefully there's a little bit more specificity around some of these things.
Sure. Okay. Well,
Okay,
thank you very much.
Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Scott. This is
Hey, how's it going?
Scott. This is a new committee member. You're fine.
Oh, hi, Scott.
Hey, how are you? Sorry, it's first time joining, so I was having a little trouble with the link there.
Oh, good. I'm glad you joined us. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's definitely good to hear Deputy Chief there talking, and I'm definitely familiar with what he's talking about. I worked in law enforcement for 14 years. I did 12 years in Florida and 2 years up in the state of Alaska. So I've worked some definitely harsh conditions in a few different places. And incident command that he's referring to, I'm definitely familiar with. The county I worked in Florida was a 2,200 square mile county, and we were in the center of the state of Florida. So we were pummeled with hurricanes pretty much every year. And so ICS and FEMA response was a very yearly occurrence.
Well, and I am concerned because, I did read through the ops plan and I felt it was not very specific on a lot of things. It felt a little bit like, it was just rushed and it was put down, but I didn't see a whole lot of specificity. And I understand that in any given incident, there can never be complete specificity, right? I mean, all
Sure.
kinds of plans go out the window. But at least if you have some kind of firm notion about, so for example, a lot of things can be handled locally. But what triggers the fact that we have to call the county because
Right.
it's bigger than what we are?
Right.
In the document, it doesn't tell me what triggers that. So let's say I were sitting in the town administrator's seat because he is our,
I see.
yeah, he's the liaison, the emergency liaison for the town. I'd be a little bit worried about, when do I call? Who do I call? Under what circumstances do I call? I'd want to know those answers. And that's what this ops plan doesn't necessarily do. It doesn't lay that out very
Yeah.
clearly for us,
And is that ops plan, because I haven't read through it, just yet. Is that ops plan something that they just developed for a first time, or is this something yearly that they relive and revisit?
They have to do it how often? Every 5 years?
Every 5 years.
Every 5 years, they have to update it. And that, there's politics because Scottsville is a small town within the county limits. And so there is a sort of a we them thing where they just politically, and I'm not saying Chief Brandy does this, but sometimes politically on both sides, really, is like, we don't want your help, we don't want your control, county person, or you guys are on your own because, we don't want to deal with you, right? You're not under our full control umbrella, if you will. So I just don't want things to get sent through the cracks. I want the county to understand that we're still our residents, they're still responsible for us, we still pay our taxes to the county. And as an elected official, I expect to get that same level of service and whatnot as any of the other county sections get. Now, to Chief Brandy's point, he's going to do, their office is going to do a risk assessment, right? Well, it would seem that if you're going to wait till the moment of the threat to do the risk assessment, there should be some notion, from my example of flooding, that there are two regions, right? The Southern Albemarle, maybe the Ivy region, that are more susceptible to that risk. And so we would bump them up in our priority agenda, something like that. But there's nothing like that right now.
Yeah, interesting. And is there anything from the town that we have that is like its own version of an EOC that says if this happens, we call this emergency contact?
We have our own operations plan.
Okay.
And it should dovetail with the counties, which is why I was trying to ask him about these ESS, because there are levels of threat assessment, right? And I was trying to pin down where are the ones that are local and where does the county get involved? And he seemed to say, well, the county gets involved in everything. But I will tell you, I don't think that's necessarily practically,
Right.
what happens in practice, right? There are a lot of things that our volunteer fire squad handles or our local police handles, and they don't ever get involved.
They do.
With the county.
They do.
All the time?
Yeah, 911 calls.
Everything?
Yes.
Well, from a dispatch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
From a
Yeah. My
dispatch,
wife.
I'm talking about response.
they do. They come down here.
Yeah. My wife, she's not.
That's right out here, the county comes.
I didn't see them on the street fire here in Scottsville.
They were down here.
I didn't see them.
I know they come down here for every call.
I know that they come down here sometimes,
Yeah.
but I don't know for every call. I think it depends on who's available, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
there
don't
could
say
be.
that there's no cooperation. I think there's a lot of cooperation, but that's at the line.
Yeah. So-
What I'm concerned about is at the higher political level.
Oh, you're talking about the.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Level. I think our teams do a great job. I know Chief Jenkins has he has MOUs with the county. I know that Chief Kersley works with the county personnel. That's on the ground. But when it comes to these kinds of political things, I think there's a whole different ballgame. And not in all cases, but just, I want to make sure that relationship is very collaborative. And to put out a county-wide ops plan with no engagement with this town, or at least from what I understand, any other area in the rural section of southern Albemarle, that causes me a little bit of concern.
So they don't have,
I see you a copy of it.
every 5 years, they don't have a committee where like members, representatives from each town is there?
They do, but in this case, and I don't think you were on when Chief O'Prandy first spoke. He said
No.
they used to do it that way, and then they decided to restructure it, and they got rid of some things, and they decided to make it more targeted. And so there is some personnel that got moved around. One key personnel person, she left, and that position still remains unfilled. So he said for the next version, they'll probably go back to that, having representatives sit around the table. But this time it didn't happen. So when is that next time? Probably 5 years from now. If something happens in between, we're looking at this document as the be all and end all. And quite frankly, it's very vague, at least from my opinion.
I see you a copy of it, so it should be in your inbox.
Okay, I'll definitely take a look at it.
Like, how do you classify it, like reading material?
Well, yeah.
Takeaway material?
That's right. Yeah, and I might be able to get my hands on the EOC that, or the EOP that our sheriff's office used to have, because I mean, we worked in conjunction with all cities in the county, and it was a very vast county. I mean, 2,200 square miles was pretty big. We had a lot
That
of
is big.
offices. And you know, there in some of the rural areas, there was a lot of working with those towns to make sure we were educated on, you know, what would happen in a response, because one, response time could be delayed, and two, you know, do they have the resources? Because I don't know what Albemarle's resources are, as far as if they had a mass event that affected the whole county. They're definitely going to, his ICS explanation of response is like a triage. He's triaging the county is all he's doing, and going, okay, where's my mass casualties, you know, and I'm going to allocate my resources to that. And, you know, they're going to go, well, how hard is it going to be to get XYZ resources out this far south or north or wherever? So what they need to do is, do they have any kind of map where their resources are allocated for, like?
Well, I asked about that. Do you have things divided into regions and whatnot? He said, no, we don't.
Yeah, usually
they do know where their resources are, but they don't have them divided by region. So
Yeah,
you
that's
have a
unfortunate.
region like ours where flooding, let's say, is a distinct possibility. Well, it's not it won't be as probable in other areas as it will
Correct.
be in our region. So I would, as somebody who would be responsible, if I were responsible, I'd want to at least have a notion of those priorities and where my assets are going to go,
Right.
depending on my incident or threat list.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
That's what I would want.
yeah. Usually there would be kind of an idea of what resources are where, then kind of the radius they can respond to. And
I do know.
But it states very clearly in here that, you know, it mentions very succinctly UVA, right? Here is mentioned. It mentions Charlottesville. It mentioned, and only tangentially mentions Scottsville or anything in the rural area. That causes an alarm to go off in my head, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not faulting these guys. These guys are doing the best job that they can. I certainly don't fault it at the line level, because I think in practice, everybody will do the needful. But again, if we have an incident like East Palestine, I want to make sure that we're as prepared as we can be. If we have to be prepared, I assumed from reading this plan that we had a max of 72 hours that we would be on our own before assistance could be delivered. And from what Chief O'Prandy said, it could be longer than 72 hours. Well, that's good to know, because if we have to let community members know how long they have to be prepared for, then I better be telling them more than 72 hours.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to know what their mutual aid relationships are with like Buckingham and Fluvanna and
So
stuff.
we have,
Because
so for us down here, we have first due in Buckingham and Fluvanna counties, certain distance wise from Scottsville. So we go through Fluvanna and Buckingham, if we go beyond our first due area, that'd be a mutual aid request that has to go through the county battalion chief.
okay, yeah,
You
and
know, they list on table 3 on page 9 in this, their events and with a score, right, a priority of hurricanes and high winds, flooding, winter storms, disease, pandemic, lightning, wildfire, drought, extreme heat, dam failure, tornado, earthquake, landslide. Those are that's the list of the most prevalent threats. And then they have them ranked by probability and severity and things like that to give a risk score.
This is a mitigation plan.
But it's not a mitigation plan.
This is what the Town Sheriff's and Planning Commission.
Yes, but still, right?
Yeah,
The top 3 are hurricanes, flooding, and winter storms,
that is true.
right? Now, it's a lot easy to deal with transporting people to the hospital when you're in Charlottesville
Yeah.
than if you're out in Southern Alabama, right? So if we have a winter storm that knocks out power and nobody has heat,
Mhm.
right? It's going to be much harder to evacuate people out here than it is in town. So those are the kinds of things I would like a little bit more consideration for. So
yeah, that
this
and
is
those
a good first step.
Yeah.
Yeah. it is. And they're all good, valid questions. And then I'll read over this EOP they had, and I also showed my wife was also invited to the committee, and she actually used to dispatch for the county
Yeah, I know
for a
her.
while. So she'll be familiar with the maps and kind of the allocated resources better than me, just because she was there in the dispatch center and could see it. So she'll be able to kind of see that she is highly, her background is all in incident command. She was a public safety supervisor, so she was handling the 2,200 square miles of all public resources, fire, EMS, and law. And so she would have, 500 units out at one time that she was in control of. So she's very used to ICS and incident command.
Well, Scott, it would be great if you two, Jack just sent you the ops plan from the county.
Yeah.
It would be great if you could look through that, if you and your wife, what's your wife's name, by the way?
Silva.
Silva, okay.
Yep.
If you and
Yeah.
Silva could look through that, and one of our meetings, if not a special meeting, we can come together at your convenience to just get sort of your insights, right? And not to throw anybody under the bus, but say, okay, here's where I think the hole is, because if we come back together with this team, with a seat on the table, I want to know sort of what should be included in the next version. And if you could share, something that you've used before that you feel it was effective, then I can use that as sort of a lens to view this one to say, where might the gaps be, right?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, there's definitely some opportunity. I remember, I mean, again, we came from an agency that was we were a little spoiled. The agency down there, we had about 900 sworn people, and then that was just the police department, the county sheriff's office there, and then we had county fire and EMS and stuff, but they were the highest accredited agency in the country. They had like 10 accreditations. If there was an accreditation to accreditate another accreditation, they would have it.
Wow.
So like, when it came to best practices, like
Yeah.
we did it every single day. It wasn't just CALIA, it was CALIA times 100.
Right.
So if there was a best practice for a best practice, we did it. So we'll read through it, and we'll certainly be able to find any opportunities that they may have or concerns. And maybe I might even print it out here at work, and then we can kind of make notes,
That would be great. And, I love that, what you talk about as best practice. And again, I don't expect the county to be, cream of the crop like that. But in the spirit of continuous improvement, where can we strengthen
right?
in the short term and in the long term, our emergency ops plan, right?
Yeah, and making it as effective as possible, because I know that I look at any agency I've worked with or talked about, you know, I can't compare it to the agency I worked at because again, they were just premier. But you know, not every agency is going to have the same resources, but you got to use the resources you have most effectively and have them placed where it's most effective to service the entire county, not just, you know, the highest populated areas, you know. So if that entails moving some resources a little outside of Charlottesville, where it's still a reasonable response, but gets a better response to the outer rural areas, then there has to be that medium, you know, where everybody can be serviced appropriately.
Well, and you know, just from my viewpoint, I've been told, not by county people necessarily, honestly, more local people, when I say, you know, what service level can I expect as a county? You know, if I always use the example, if my husband has a heart attack, right? What can I expect in terms of when people show up? And the answer that I get more often than not is, well, you have to understand you're in the rural area and you have to expect that you're going to have a longer time or not. And my response is, I pay county taxes just like everybody else, and I expect a certain level. And if my husband dies because your people can't get here, that's not a great excuse to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of my personal feeling about that. And I just want to make sure that, you know, we have a unique set of needs, I think, in the rural areas. And I make sure that those get voiced very acutely at the county level. I just want to make sure that those fall through the cracks, you know. We have a lot of really great people in this community. I want to do the best by them that I possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, any kind of trauma alert in a rural area should, if there's not a nearby, you know, ambulance, I would imagine the appropriate response would be that you're launching a helicopter and you're finding an LZ somewhere, because any kind of trauma response in a rural area, you're not going to make it back to UVA in time. Unless you have advanced life support and they're sending out their Pegasus to you, where they're going to, you know, be able to work you the whole way. Like you would need a helicopter for certain traumas. And so that would be interesting for them to incorporate in their plan to show, like, you know, I know that when they dispatch a certain dispatch, they're prioritized by trauma level. So, you know, does that trauma level change when there's distance involved like that in a rural response? You know, is a trauma of a heart attack in the middle of downtown Seville the same trauma response as it is in Scottsville? Because
that's my exact question. Thank you.
So
you know,
they don't airlift anybody out of the city because how close UVA is to the city. So they transport all those trauma people UVA.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that would be my curiosity is, you know, how does that plan look? It should look differently to a rural area, because if a heart attack in the middle of Seville could elicit an ambulance response, because their response time is probably less than 12 minutes on average. Whereas in Scottsville, that's not the case. And then so what they need to be weighing is, okay, when we dispatch this level trauma, you know, it's based upon a response time that we can give here. That level of trauma has only XYZ amount of time of survivability rate. We need to know, what do we increase our response time because of distance, you know, and utilize different resources. And then what are those resources? And and that needs to all be taken into factor, because, you know, if I was on a scene in rural Polk County when I was working, if I had a trauma alert, I would just, as a deputy, call for a helicopter. I'd say, launch me a helicopter. We got a trauma, you know, and dispatch is going to start doing it, because they know that the nearest freaking ambulance is 45 minutes away. And there's no way this person will survive with a 45 minutes response time and then a 45-minute drive time to the hospital. It just won't happen.
And that's why I was a little bit surprised that there aren't regions called out in here, where then you could assess by region what the response would be.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we just deal with it incident as incident. And that sort of had me head scratching a little bit.
Yep.
I'll pick I don't know about
I'll pick my wife's brain on it, because she, again, not only did she work here at dispatch, she was public safety, over all of public safety at Polk County over dispatch. So she knows we had rural areas, populated areas. I would be interested to find out what their their setup for that was, what their response. She'll know off the top of her head. She'll be like, oh yeah, if we would have dispatched out in, the equivalent of Scottsville for us would have been like Fort Meade. And it's the same kind of thing where that was on the county line of the county. It was way south of the county. We had deputies that were assigned out there. There was a Fort Meade station for a fire truck and an ambulance, but most of them were volunteer, similar to Scottsville, where we have volunteers that are nearby, and maybe some that are assigned. But as far as like heavy resources, I'm curious to find out like how they navigated that. Because she would know. So
Yeah, and I mean, all of us as residents of the area, it would behoove us to know too, because it's going to affect us.
yeah,
Right? Whether my husband has a heart attack or, someone in your household has a trauma of some
oh,
sort.
100%.
If there's a broader incident, right?
Yeah.
I just
Yeah,
want to make sure we're all protected.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got, in the areas where we're at too. I mean, there's a lot of hunting involved, fishing, a lot of trauma accidents can happen just from recreation, not even just medical. I mean, you could have somebody just simply hunting and shoot themselves. And what's the response? I mean,
Or shoot somebody else. And we had,
right.
Jack and I have talked about and tried to push on our parks because so in the Van Cleef area, for example, there aren't mile markers on that. So we brought up what happens in the event of an emergency out there. How do you let people know where you are,
Yeah, how do
right?
you mark that? Yeah.
Yeah, you better know the trail you're on. So
Yeah.
but we asked those kinds of things, know the trail you're on, know where you're located. We wanted those put on the town maps, but we still, even within town, haven't gotten that, through yet. So
Yeah, because even when they reverse.
in terms of continuous improvement, there's a lot of work to be done, I guess, is
Yeah.
the net there, so.
Well, good. We'll review this and then we'll keep in touch, and then my wife and I are going to try to, if not in person, at least virtually set up. It took me a minute to kind of get our feet going. We've been back in the area now for a little while, but both of our jobs were we both had a lot happen at our jobs very quickly. We both ended up promoting very quickly and taking over what we were doing, and so it got a little chaotic there for a second. So
and if we need to meet outside of the EPC, we're glad, Jack and I will be glad to meet you and your wife at any time that's convenient. If it's later, we're often in town for meetings,
What meetings, right?
and whatnot. We have, town council meetings and things like that evening. So whatever's convenient for you, Scott, I would love to get you, the opinion of you and your wife on this. So
definitely.
don't feel like you just have to come to these meetings. We can also meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'm usually once a week ish. I end up with a half day because I work a half day on Saturday. So, my wife and I can coordinate up with her day off, me taking a half day and be done by noon, and we'd have the whole afternoon to kind of figure something out. And
That would be great.
we could just coordinate that stuff. And then, besides that, we're always back in town by 5 o'clock. We drive in from Charlottesville, but we always get back down to Scottsville around 5.
We could be, dinner, after dinner,
Yeah.
whatever works for you. So you just let us know.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you.
All
I'll
right,
keep in
thank you.
touch.
No
All right.
problem. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.